Hi, everyone. This is Phyllis Klein, and welcome to Poets in Conversation. Tonight we have Mistee St. Clair and Abby Wheeler reading, and they're both wonderful poets. Mistee is from Alaska, and Abby is from Cincinnati, Ohio. Mistee's from Juneau, Alaska, I should say. And we'll be hearing poetry about places, um, poetry that's rooted into the natural world, family connections and friendship connections. Um, and Mistee and Abby and I met through our, I was going to say consultation group, but it's a poetry crafting group that was started as an outgrowth of Ellen Bass's uh, workshop that was online. We got lucky enough to be paired up with Amanda Moore as our mentor. And there are a few of us, several of us in our group who are here tonight. And so I've gotten to know these two poets and all of the poets in our group so that I can now call them friends. And I can truly say that I love them and their poetry. I'm going to read a poem to start us with. So I was going to read a poem for my dermatologist, but I I really couldn't do that because of the war that's going on right now in the Ukraine. So I decided to read this poem, a poem that's in my book in the international news section. And it was prompted by a poem by Jack Gilbert called The Difficult Beauty. And the epigraph reads, dandelions kept alive by the finest gardeners in the world who knew how to work against nature. And the name of the poem is The Human Tragedy. You can only avoid it for so long, like reading a story set in pre-war France, knowing something terrible will happen to the lovely Jewish characters. Why do you read it? When you started, it was a happy story. Good fortune draws you in. Love starts off loudly, calling with the ecstasy of a requiem. Only you don't want to realize that beauty leads to the grief until it happens. More and more of it these days. More of the people gathering, the bombs gushing off, the dead and the survivors. No need to explain what fear feels like. It's in you. It's sitting beside you. It's in the backs of the gardeners as they bend over the plain yellow flowers, weeding out everything else that wants to grow. Thank you. Um, so, okay, now I'm going to introduce Mistee. It's my pleasure to introduce Mistee St. Clair. She's the author of This Morning is Different, an Alaska Literary Award grantee, and has poems in a forthcoming in Split Rock Review, Northwest Review, Swim Every Day, Sky Island Journal, and others. She is of Northern European and Tanana Athabascan descent and is an enrolled member of the native village of Minto. Born and raised in Alaska, she currently lives in Linget Ani, hope I'm saying that right, Juneau, Alaska, a northern rainforest where she raises two fledgling sons and works seasonally for the Alaska State Legislature. In the off season, she travels anywhere there is sun. She can be found at misteestclair.com. So thanks, Mistee.
You. Thank you, Phyllis. Good afternoon or evening for many of you. Thank you for being here. I see a lot of members from the writing group that Phyllis mentioned, but also my local writing group, and it's just really nice to see familiar faces. So we met over a year ago taking a workshop online with, I call her my mentor, Amanda Moore. And Abby and I felt like an immediate kinship and connection with her writing. I feel like we explore, similar subjects and just have a similar thought process. But we've never met in person, and I hope someday we get to. So I was really excited that we both have chapbooks coming out, or had chapbooks coming out the same year with the same press. I thought that was pretty cool. Also, little fun fact, we've crossed many paths in life, and one of them is that I lived in Homer, Alaska for several years where my children were born, and Abby happened to be visiting there at the same time I was living there, which I think is kind of cool. Anyways, I'm going to read a few poems from my book, and then I'll read some newer poems too. So as it was mentioned, I'm from Alaska. I was born and raised here. I've lived in the state most of my life. I have a bodily connection to this place. Even when I'm frustrated by its weather or the isolation of being up here, especially during the pandemic. So the first poem I'm going to read was actually written when I was living in Oregon for a few years, and I just felt really lost. Home. If I could say everything I wanted to say, it would be that the hollow crush of snow and black nights are lonely, but spring rubs downy willow catkins against the cheek. I should have held to the willow, which holds strong but bends well to thick layers of snow and vast currents on the banks of rivers. Rivers are roads and carve marks in the land. Until I left my landmarks, I didn't know I wove my whole being to place, so that its maps were my memories. Memories are fickle, and I fear I will forget names, thick like chocolate in my mouth. Chena, Yukon, Fish Camp. Home exists both in body and earth. Earth is a river, the current of my heart. The land maps my body with mountains and valleys. I am a valley of gold, hills of gold dust, rust gold rivers. A fleck of gold weighs more than the sun and the heart's heavy sighing. I also tend to write a lot about my children. They don't seem to care yet. They're teenagers. And I always ask them before I publish a poem if it's okay. And I think they think nobody reads them, so they don't really care. So these ones so they're teenagers now, and they are wonderful children, but they are teenagers. Picking crab apples. There was a day last September, still warm and sunny, when I walked the beach barefoot and felt the sun romance my shoulders. Later, my son and I climbed our apple tree to pick the wild crab apples and snack on the thumb-sized fruits. Last year, a bear broke off a bough, but the tree is middle-aged and sturdy enough to carry on with a large scar and a new shape. My son dared me to climb higher. I had one foot braced against the trunk and the other in a crook. My legs split and stretched as I reached higher and further. Just a few months before, the little nubs were small white blooms. Then they were ripening, flushed red-orange like rose hips. It was too early, we knew, for the little extra nectar maturity provides, for the flaming red a good frost would bring. But I was tempted by his playfulness, and he by the sun. When we couldn't reach any higher, we left the rest for the porcupines. I didn't know it then, but those were his last days of youth. I did not know that he'd cut his hair, and I would feel the lost weight like a pressed bruise. I did not know that the next summer I'd climb the tree only once, lonely and not so high, that the apples from then on would fall to the ground as bright red globes in October. I did not know any of this as we lowered ourselves to the still green earth, a bittersweet tartness drying my mouth. And this next one is for my older son. It's modeled after an Ellen Bass poem called Cold. Mine takes a very different direction. My son and I fight. On this early fall morning, my son and I fight before breakfast, before school, before the day has the opportunity to be good. Of course, I immediately want to give up and yield to his approaching adulthood. I want to tell him I might be wrong, but after 15 minutes, I cannot let go, and he goes silent. For a moment, I remember nursing him so long ago, my hands broad across his bare back, and pressing him to my breasts with a sudden, wild love of his smell, his folds, his velvety neck. It seems possible that those insatiable minutes were preemptive appeals for forgiveness. For days like these when my hands are cold and my grip tight, for days like these when I would fail. Abby and I each requested a poem from each other to read from our books. So this was her request. It's the title poem of the book. It was written at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I was working from home because everything was in such transition that there really wasn't much for me to do. It was just a really strange time, and I spent a lot of time looking out my dining room window. This morning is different. There have been no birds in the yard this morning. I have nothing to do these days but observe them. I like the visit of the common robin sitting on the fence with her wings slightly drooped, her intent study of the grass matching my study of her. A small flock of starlings could land, skitter across the yard like marbles, then fly off, abrupt as a street light going out at midnight. This morning is different. The leaves of the rhodies are unfurling, laying up like a sunbather lays out, glossy under the spring sun. Where is the song sparrow? Watching him is my new morning habit. I miss his little body beyond the window in the unleafed cherry tree. Hunkered down, puffed up, an old man in his fat coat, his little beak raised up, singing, singing. I had thought his song was desperate, a prayer. But now I see I am the baker here. The next poem I'm going to read is actually a really old poem, but when Abby and I were talking about making selections for our readings, I had an idea. She has a poem in her book about tomatoes in the summer, and I have a poem about tomatoes in the summer. And this is what I mean about our connection. We somehow tend to write the same things. So I just felt like I had to read these. Late August tomatoes. When there is still heat, there are tomatoes. Thumb-sized cherries and bulbous, misshapen heirlooms split by the sun. Ample in the hand like milk-heavy breasts. The afternoon is heady with a fat, grassy scent. We pull them from their strong stemmed bodies, their skins shining in fever. The heat swells into night. We light a candle between us, new moon blackening the sky, and we lull. Smoke a forbidden cigarette or two, drink wine while bats swoop, and pop those perfect cherries. Still sun warmed, summer sleeping within, leaving only the sepals, little crowns of seduction. So the next poems I'm going to read are newer poems. I've lately been turning towards my father, my heritage, the body, our connection to nature, our relationship to earth, which in my mind is all intertwined. And the first two poems that I'll read are about my father, which I should explain. He's suffered from alcoholism his whole life, or his whole adult life. And our relationship is complicated. He's also dying. So I've been writing a lot about his addiction and his impending death, as well as our ancestry. Addiction. Who is this husk with smoke still rising? This old scarecrow with ankles tapered like a whittled twig? Wasn't he once a storyteller, a soft singer, a father? He tells us to clean out the trailer, but there is nothing we want. The ridges of his toothless gums flash like red flags, his tongue hefty and bright as a slap, a mouth of coal. My sister and I want the old days when his whiskey was a soothing amber and his smoke was misty visions. When he taught us to swear and sat us in the cab of a cat and showed us how to push the earth out of our way. What he wants, besides the gun that has been hidden, is to eat. Though he can barely swallow, he says he'll drink antifreeze if he has to. A red line of scar blazes across his neck, ear to ear. Smoke would curl from his grave, but he wants to burn, flare like the wild and wither to ash. He'll dust our feet, and we'll try to remember the man who sat us on his lap and taught us to steer down Chena Pump Road, the long straight road fast ahead of us, wanting faster and faster. Raven appropriates my father. Fairbanks, Alaska. Every spring, my father's birthday arrives, and he is surprised by his own pulse. The snow spreads across the valley, but the willows will soon blossom their soft fur before leafing. Thaw after thaw will free the river's pent power. All around there is energy, for now cancer embodied. But what is left? He is still full of dark matter. His whole life he's shaped the land or made something from nothing, whistled and sworn while the hammer sounds, even nailed a few caskets for those who were good to him. He doesn't seem to know he's been searching for the end of darkness, only that he was claimed by the raven he killed 40 years ago. It's been waiting. He should follow. And the next two poems, I turn more towards nature and our complicated relationship with the earth. I'll just leave it at that. I want this to be a praise poem. It was September, the cottonwoods edging yellow, the willows waving their medallions over the bank of the river. There was the good sky, unusually sunny, with a lingering golden warmth. The spruce up the hill a strong green. On the trail between the river and the forest stood a lone wolf, ears forward and attentive to the water, his amber coat like a mottled nugget. He was so close I could see his guard hairs ruffling when he trotted to the river. I suppose I should have been afraid, or felt chosen, lucky, like I'd won the lottery. Instead, I thought of the stuffed black wolf my grandfather had mounted on a large gray rock with a plaque of his victory. As a child, I could not help but run my hands along its back, down its shins to wide feet. The black fur so thick I couldn't press a finger deep enough to skin. That wolf was small compared to this gilded one, who must have known I was there, yet he never glanced my way. The truth is, though I walk this way nearly every day, I rarely think of that golden wolf. I think more about the dead wolf and the fortune it embodied, the horror and grief, but also the secret thrill of its marble eyes. This next poem, a couple of years ago, about this time of year, four boys got lost in their village outside of the northwest, on the northwest coast of Alaska. And they survived, but as a mother, their story just haunted me. So this poem is in response to their story. Found, Nunamikwa, Alaska. They were protecting the baby, says the rescuer who found all four boys alive, huddled in one lump like a mass of newborn mice, and partly burrowed in the snow. The baby was in the middle, the 7-year-old blocking the storm, the oldest in soaked cotton sweats. Lost 18 miles chasing a fox into the calling white. The wind, a kind of monster, rushed across the coastal plain, as if it had a nose for the exposed. Do you know which of your own children would block the wind for the other? And the mother, did she kill all the foxes and hang the village with drying skins, and then sew a shield of impenetrable furs, stitch by even stitch, binding those boys together so they would never know winter tasting them again? And the last poem I'm going to read is a poem so Phyllis, Abby, and I met at Amanda Moore's writing workshop. And the last workshop we had with Amanda, she left us with this idea of writing letter poems to each other because she was taking a break. So Abby and I reached out to each other, and we've been writing letter poems, not prolifically, but it's been really fun. So this poem I'm going to read next is the first poem that I wrote to her. Grasses. This morning I woke crying. I had been running through a house of many rooms. I came out on a bridge over steep hillsides with tall grasses. I wanted that grass, to collect the grass and smell its sweetness. Instead, I went through another door to his office. On his drafting table was a check ledger, money made out to me. Tell me, what is grief before it becomes grief? Is it me scribing his words when he calls? His words, my inheritance? I don't want money. It is night again. I am on the bridge again, and the northern lights sweep by. The northern lights as a body, a pulsing body of color flying by. I woke with my own sob. I fear my father dying like I fear losing my teeth. I think you understand. Before I opened my eyes, a light swept over them, as if a car's headlights moved past my bedroom window. But my bedroom window faces the mountains. There was no light. Thanks, everyone.
Oh gosh, Mistee. I have poem envy. Those are just so magnificent, every single one of them. Um,
Thank you.
oh, you're welcome. And the way you read them too, you have the most wonderful reading voice. I think it would be great if you make an audio of your book or your next book. So yeah, thank you so much. Is there anything when you I just wonder, as you have read those now, what are you how does it feel? What are you left with? there's such a wide variety of subjects that you've captured in I don't know how many minutes it's been, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have obsessions and write about the same thing, but also I write about everything. And as I was making my selections, I kind of tried to give a wide range. Um, yeah,
mhm. Yeah, I mean, just the poems about your father, and just the way you introduced that and how you talked about there's just so much that we learn, about you and about your life and at least some things anyway, just by hearing these poems. So
definitely a narrative poet.
yeah, yeah, and it's wonderful. It makes me want to write more narrative. You really do inspire. Um, I'm wondering. I think what we were going to do now during this break time is something actually. I think it was your idea, Mistee. Yeah, to invite Abby to read a a poem that she wrote to you, and then I don't know how many. I wasn't quite sure how many you were going to do, but was it more than one? But whatever you want to
20.
do is fine. Yeah.
Yeah,
So do you want Abby? Shall we ask Abby to read hers now? And
I think that'd be fun, and then we can talk about it.
okay, all right. So yeah, welcome, Abby.
Thanks. Um, so this is my poem, which is in response to the poem that Mistee just read. And it's called, and it is sort of a fun, we can talk about it, but it is a fun mixture between letter and poem. And this is I Don't Dream Here. I too dream of losing my teeth. They say it's common, representing anxiety, loss of control. It was only a dream until one day I brought my finger to my mouth to bite off a bit of dead skin, and off came part of my tooth. The waking world was never more terrifying. I can still feel the jagged edge years later here in this hospital room. There's a large window filled mostly with sky. There's a side of the building, and I can see a window propped open, even though it's 2 weeks till Christmas. I don't dream here. Nights are filled with the blue lights of IV pumps, nurses checking my blood at hours meant for witches. They're all witches' hours until I ask someone to lift the curtain.
Oh, thank you so much, Abby. Um, yeah, what a beautiful poem, and what um how what it's what a surprise to when we realized where you were writing it from. Um, so um, would you like to talk about those two together a little bit? Um,
I'll just start by saying I have been having so much fun with these. They're very freeing. I'm not sure if other people are revising. I've been doing it with a couple people. I'm not sure if other people are revising. I have to revise, but I don't revise very much. And it feels very just this sense of freedom to just send off something to somebody else. Where I'm striving towards this intimate tone, and maybe there's some insider knowledge that we both have. Um, but also I'm trying to expand upon the poem and open it up. Um, and it just feels it's just been really fun. And to respond, um, to have this sense of reading something that they wrote and there's just something that catches my eye and I need to respond to that. Kind of like how you do in your response to the news poems, Phyllis.
mm,
It's fun to like catch that and kind of ride those sails. So it's been really freeing for me because I don't have any expectations for myself or for the poem.
Yeah, I think you're inspiring a number of us. Yeah. So, and maybe more people who are here tonight will begin to do this as well. Yeah. Did you want to say anything more, Abby, or should we have Misty read hers, the next one?
Oh, I don't have another one.
Oh,
We
okay.
were just reading one each.
It has been liberating for me as well. Um, in that usually it takes me like days or weeks or months to write a poem. And these letter
Yeah.
poems, I will just sit down and write it, like maybe in like under an hour or half an hour. And that has always been a challenge for me to sort of write a poem on demand. Um, but this has been like knowing that I'm just sending this off to a friend um, makes it easier to not um, worry about it so much. And it's been good practice and just sort of quickly writing something and seeing what comes out. And like you said, Missy, just like grab it. Like there's always something to respond to, whether it's like an image or a word or even the form, copying the form that you use. Um, it's been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot comes out of it too. And I do think it really brings you closer and
Mm.
connects. It's very special. And there's really a wonderful connection there. And Juan says, it makes me want to write one too. And Renee says, you're inspiring us. And I think, yeah, I definitely feel the same way. Yeah.
It
So,
also feels like there's this freedom to wander. Like, I don't know about you, Abby, but like I'll maybe grab onto something that you start, but then I kind of
Mhm.
wander off into something else. And it's just, yeah, it's very freeing.
it
Yeah.
makes, yeah, I kind of want to hear more, but I know you didn't plan for that. So I won't put you on the spot. But it really does kind of leave that feeling of more. Um, yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
shall I go on now to introduce Abby?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Let me
Sure.
find my notes for that. Okay. Okay. So it's another pleasure of mine tonight to introduce Abby Wheeler. She was born and raised in a small river town just downstream from Cincinnati, Ohio. Making a home in Cincinnati, she was a 2021 finalist for the Midwest Writing Challenge and has work published or forthcoming in Swim, Grist, the Free State Review, and elsewhere. Her chapbook, In the Roots, is available from Finishing Line Press. Abby shares a home with her husband, their cats, and dog, and she loves to garden, cook, and wander about the city. And she can be found online at abbywheeler.com. So yeah, I'll let you dive in, Abby. You need to unmute.
Okay. I'll dive right in. This is a poem called Solstice. We build a fire outside and tell ourselves we commune with nature. When our toes get cold, we spread the coals and go in, set work alarms, and switch off bloodless lights on this longest night. I used to dress for the weather and always knew the phase of the moon. I used to say a prayer before sleep. But when I close my eyes now, my mind is a midnight lake and words break on its surface. I used to imagine driving the highway, this valley before, when harvest moons and long shadows kept time, when the sky was a map and the ground held us up, when we did not close our eyes because what we saw was a prayer and our mouths made the shape of our songs. My people do not use the word ancestors. My family does not speak of our people. My mouth searches for its shape. Um, all right. Well, like Phyllis said, I live in Cincinnati, but was born and raised and lived for a long time in a small town, actually upstream from Cincinnati. And uh, like you said before we started the official presentation, Mistee, I don't think about the place of my upbringing or the natural world consciously when I'm writing, but I know that it informs my poetry because I know that that environment has largely shaped who I am. And in that vein, this next poem is included in this anthology, which is called "I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing: Ohio's Appalachian Voices." Um, it was edited by our poet laureate here in Ohio. And if that interests you, it's pretty interesting. And it only just came out. It's available for pre-order right now. So this is called River. I have laid eyes on my Ohio nearly every day, have seen what it carries, how fast and how high, watched the fog burn off in the morning sun, and birds dive for its bugs in still hot evenings. I have paddled that river, slept beside it, cut my feet on its clamshells, have been diverted by it. I have sat on a blanket in a crowd and hoped the fireworks skating on its surface would not end. Are you from here? My oncologist asks. The river valley? Goes on to explain the pulmonary nodules are common to us born breathing the musty river air. I'm not surprised the way it sinks into dips, how we all have wet basements that flood when it rains, and dehumidifiers to keep old furniture from rotting. Why not settle into my dark spaces, seep into unclaimed moments like grief? We'll just need to keep an eye on them, make sure they don't grow any bigger. When we were kids and mom was busy, dad would pick up fried chicken and take us to the river for dinner. It's been 9 months now, and we haven't scattered his ashes. When I close my eyes to talk to him, all I see is black water. When I close my eyes to talk to God, I see my father's face. He must know something, but don't say nothing, he'd sing. I try to believe the river lives in the body, steady as a heartbeat, rambling or raging, that we're pinned into place like a dot on a map, a spot on a scan, a speck of ash. This is called The Tug. Do you remember that woman in the story? Felt all the world's pain for so long that she filled her pockets with rocks and walked into the river. Do you remember in 7th grade when we went to Washington and that chaperone cried when the guard changed at the tomb of the unknown soldier? Someone asked what was wrong, and she said, all those mothers. Then that summer, dinner on your deck, your mom slapped a mosquito and the blood smeared on her arm. Your little brother cried and cried even when they brought out the ice cream. Remember how I always wanted to go fishing, but never to fish? How I hated throwing them back with that hole in their mouth? I'd imagine casting the lure, watching it break the perfect surface, and waiting for it to sink, then feeling a tug, reeling it in, and finding at the end of the line a silver, shimmering fish with purple eyes that looked right at me. And when I peered in its mouth, there wasn't a hook, just a glossy golden stone. So putting together the poems for this reading was interesting because an interesting challenge because I was trying to use only poems that have been published. So some of these are from my chapbook, uh, and some are published elsewhere. But Mistee, as she mentioned, had the idea to have each of us choose a poem from each other's books to read. Um, and this is the tomato poem that she chose from my book. Tomato Intentions, which is much different than Mistee's tomato poem. Tomato Intentions. Summer is sitting on my countertop. It is a red tomato growing plumper by the day. Soon I'll sink my teeth in slowly, as slow as the sun sets in July, the light, bright fireflies popping on my tongue. Juice dribbling down my chin as if from a peach in a poem about water dropping off my paddle early in the morning in the cool, dark lake pockets where the herons fish and the turtles sleep. Or maybe I'll slice it, cool and crisp as the crack of a bat as the crowd goes wild, and set it on a slice of white bread with a slather of shimmering mayonnaise that plays with the rays of the sun like the oil on the old ladies laying in the sand, like the water itself. Put it on a plate, perhaps, with a cut up cucumber, vinegar, and a sliver of onion for that tang, that zip of the tent, with the sliver of moon in the sky, the air thick with humidity, waiting to be wrung of summer, like a tomato on the counter. This is another one from the chapbook. It's called Passenger Seat. When we talk about whatever it is we're doing, there's no master plan, no mountains to scale or lists of cities whose sunsets we'll see, no horizon, just grinding. I know recovery happens one day at a time. Sometimes, though, I wonder what you're recovering. Where's the half-buried stepping stone you'll pull up from the muck to uncover your go-ahead? You're all good. Your plan, you tell me, is to love me as if this were the greatest devotion, as if I wasn't in the car with the motor running and a bag full of snacks. Um, so this next poem I haven't shared before. And so Mistee, when you were mentioning our common topics, um, I don't know that if you know that I also have poems about addiction. This is called We Cross Our Fingers for Nothing. And it begins with a dictionary definition, double negative, a positive statement in which two negative elements are used to produce the positive force. They cut it out, but I'm still not safe. No more tumor, but I don't not have to check. Negative as double as the hole in my pelvis filled with flesh from my thigh. I wrestled with an angel and got up looking over my shoulder. People who get it, fellow remissionaries, recovering addicts. We're not supposed to call them that, addicts. They're people with addictions. I should know I live with one. If he's not a person, neither am I. We both know each snare, each stitch is probably nothing, but could be something. We cross our fingers for nothing. We measure time in scans and chips. He is in recovery as I listen for wings. Or we will both never not need to be checked. Or I got torn up and he got torn down and we live in a house full of flowers. Um, this poem is after a poem by Jericho Brown called Flower. And I did that exercise where you follow another poem's format word for word. So for instance, his poem is 4 stanzas of 2 words each. And so that's how mine is constructed. And the parts of speech are mostly the same too, where he has a noun, I have a noun, etc. And his poem uses the color yellow, and I use the color purple. Cosmos. Purple dusk, purple dark, misty purple spring. Earthworm seams stitched plumb across my middle. You patch a purple wound, kiss my midnight eyes. This busted body keeps beating. Tender love, purple blood.
Are you at the end now, Abby? Do you have more? One more.
One more. Is
Oh, cool.
that okay?
Oh, yeah. No, I just couldn't tell if
One
you.
day
Yeah.
begins the greening. It's in the way after a long winter in which the bleak and barren seem to have no end, let alone a beginning. One day begins the greening. There, on the tips of the trees and fluttering a rabbit's nose above the ground, a suggestion. Of renewal, you might think, but no, persistence. Because then comes another, and there is all of life again, all of color, of warmth, all growing, all blossoming, all love, all light. And is it a miracle? Does the heady sense of petrichor have you believing all is made new? This is the truth. When consumed by darkness, your path disappears before you. Just then the earth churns its perfect work beneath your feet, feeding the fount of spring's first flower, the one who waits until the ground is soft enough to push through tenderly at first, a rabbit's nibble, and lift its purple head, bobbing, nodding you forward. The end.
Hooray, Abby. That was fantastic. Oh, Amanda says, thanks, Abby. So great to hear your stunning poems. And I couldn't agree with that more. Yeah, a lovely selection from you. Very lovely work from Kathy Liss. And it is so beautiful to hear you and Misty read side by side and to catch some of the deeper connections that that we might not have been thinking about as much before hearing you read together. Helena says, I am so touched by your work, and I have to agree that your work is so moving. And I think Juan said earlier that each one of you, he was speaking to Misty, but I think each one of you incorporates so much vulnerability also and transparency. And of course, it's poetry, so it doesn't necessarily have to be all true, all the truth. But your writing, it just brings so much connection for me when I hear these painful things, and it just brings so much compassion, empathy, and connection and the way you make it so beautiful. So I'd like to open this up. I hope everybody will unmute and if somebody has something they want to say, Mary Marcia in the chat, and there's been a lot of chat activity going on, says, so very good to hear, Abby. So many impressions bring me an everyday quality to appreciate and artistic art alike to word painting. That's a beautiful comment. Mary Marcia, do you want to say anything, or I don't mean to
No,
put you on the spot?
what I want to say is I appreciated there's a spatial quality, like as in space, to the way the poems come out. And it's for me like seeing an everyday object differently. You have a very unique, I feel, way of looking at things and then turning them around and just presenting them as if, of course you see that. Of course, you know, that's the way it is. But I never thought of it that way. There's just, I was taken by the tug, especially because I had those experiences. I mean, about not wanting to put a hole in the fish or somehow. And remembering all those things. And the tomato intentions is another, that's the case where it seems so everyday and yet it's not the way the poem is posed. I just appreciate it so much. I think like, how did she do that? Like it sounds like it just made it like spontaneously, but I think somehow you intuit these things. It's really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't know, you know, I don't have a question. I just appreciating.
It's quite okay. Yeah. Mistee, do you want to talk about your tomato poem? And Abby says it's different. Hers is very different, but I wonder what you think.
Well, I mean, I think they both capture summer. You know, summer's captured in a tomato, literally. But the thing about Abby's poem is that's brilliant about it is it's very simple, and it's taking like the simple tomato and it's talking about eating it in these very simple ways, right? Just on white bread with mayonnaise or with a cucumber or just plain, and you're just eating it. So hers is more sensual in the actual eating part. I think mine's more about just the feeling of summer captured in a tomato and the heat and all that stuff. But
yeah, it is really remarkable that you both wrote about the same subject long before you even knew who each other was.
Yeah.
And then the one about addictions too.
Addiction and rivers, the land.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, so one of the things, well, so I just want to see, let's see if anybody else would like to say something. I mean, this has been such a rich and really beautiful reading. Yeah, Renee, do you want to?
Oh, sure.
I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, this is a comment for Abby. I was struck during your reading with how many poems mention or use the word mouth, right? The mouth of the river, the speaker's mouth. And I just wondered if you, I don't want to say like it's intentional or something, but if you have a comment about that, or if someone else has noticed that about your work. I mean, I think it's interesting because it calls to mind like language, but also openings and possibilities. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I don't have thoughts about the word mouth or the idea of mouth specifically, and that's not something that I've done consciously or thought about really. But I do know that, I mean, I have noticed that I tend to use a lot of the same words over and over in different poems. And I think that's, I don't know if that's a good thing. Maybe not so much, at least if I'm aware of it, I guess. But it's not on purpose. It just kind of, that's just what comes out. I think part of it is sonic.
I have noticed that I like the soft consonants and the short vowels, I guess. Um, and so mouth fits into that category. So that might be part of it. But no, like mouth specifically is not something that I have thought about before.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Juan, looks like you have a question too.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for the reading. This is amazing. I have so much to say. And during the like small moments, I was just taking notes on stuff that I'm inspired to write. But I just want to quickly say, Abby, I love the spiritual connection, and I really appreciate the fact that you're searching for the word rather than like I'm just gonna use a word. I feel like it's very easy to go cliche for spiritual content. So I love the fact that you explored and you're like, you said something about my mouth is searching for the word, which I feel it's a lot more profound than just spelling it out. I love that. The refrains also used very good. For Mistee, the alliteration in the first nature poem felt like there was a knife in the background, and I never saw it, but it just felt like there was a knife moving around. And then the wolf somehow just all kind of started relating really in a really interesting way for me. The phrasing is very rich. I feel the femininity in the feminine energy, receptivity, motherhood in the poems, very beautiful. And Phyllis, I really like that imagery of the back that you used, that reference. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. It was beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you for your comments, Juan. That's those are really great that you were able to get that much out of it from just hearing it once. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention to Abby that I think if you reference Natalie Diaz, who I think she's pretty darn good, and she repeats a lot of words throughout when in her manuscript she's got, and to me I think it really it just brings you it connects you in a certain way because you're using the word differently maybe, or there's a thread that you're bringing through. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. Yeah. So, and let's see, so who else? I know there's more in the chat.
Phyllis,
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to say it's really a treat to hear both Mistee and Abby read extensively from their work because, we've experienced them in delightful mouthfuls, but you really get a deeper sense of the body of work and the what the poet is doing and what they're seeking to explore. So that was just a real treat.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah,
Kathy.
I agree. Yeah. And
I have a observation.
Fabulous. Yeah.
The other Kathy.
The other Kathy.
Yeah. Mistee described herself as a narrative poet, or her poems as narrative. And I think in ways you're both that way. And I'm struck by how in both cases you're able to start one place and just you're not really free associating, but you're not letting yourself get hemmed in by this is my subject, these are my words. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about your process briefly,
Beautiful.
each of you.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Abby, Mistee.
That's a huge question.
Yeah. A little on the spot there.
I'll go first, I guess. I think that I usually start out in one place and end in another. Sometimes that's just natural, and most of the time it's just revision. Most of the time, as I'm revising a poem, I'm asking myself, what do I really mean? What am I really trying to say? what am I really thinking or feeling, or what do I not know? So I think that's how my poems end up in different places
Oh,
oftentimes,
that's
because
interesting.
I really am asking myself, like, why am I writing about this? Why does this matter? Because a lot of times it's just a journal entry that just goes awry.
Oh,
Honestly.
okay. All right. That's interesting.
I'd be curious about Abby. I will say that, so I consider myself very narrative, and I consider Abby narrative too, but Abby's really good at letting the wild and the strange in, where I'm a little less,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
more reserved that way, and I'm a little less wild mind. And I appreciate that about Abby's poems, that she is able to strike out in different places and not she's not afraid to take risks, where I'm maybe a little more afraid of those.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I love it.
Doesn't seem like you're afraid to do that. Yeah. So Abby wasn't sure about the question, so I put in the chat. Oops. Am I muted?
I
Oh,
don't know
no, I
why.
just put in the chat. It's the question is, what is your writing process? Does that capture the question?
Yeah, I was just saying it appears as though both of these poets start out with an idea or subject in mind, but they don't let themselves get so tied to it. And
Oh,
they
right.
allow themselves to just kind of like tumble through with language as though they are on a river. And yet the poem ends up cohering very nicely. So yeah, in essence, what is your process? How do you do that? How do
Sorry
you
about that.
magic?
We had a quick computer switch through. John, do you want this one? Um,
I hope that'll be better now, Abby.
I tend to, I have a really hard time making things up. Like I could never be a fiction writer, I don't think. And so I also just write from experience and from what I am feeling and seeing. Um, and it's interesting. I mean, we've been talking about place a lot, and that's not like I never set out to write about like write a nature poem, you know, but it just sort of comes in because that's what I'm seeing and that's what's on my mind. Um, and 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 so how can it not, you know? But I think my process is I don't know, something will just like I'll have some sort of issue that I'm trying to deal with in my mind or wrap my head around or something, and it just sort of swirls around in there for a while, and I'll think, well, that's a poem, but I'm not sure what it is yet. And eventually I do a lot of reading. I mean, reading poetry really helps me like, oh, this is what I need to do for that idea that's in my head. And that helps a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I second everything Abby said.
Yeah, it just sounds like really good advice for any of us who are writing poetry. So I didn't want to, yeah, I hope I wasn't rushing away from the answer. I wanted to read what Perry Longo says. You both make extraordinary out of the ordinary. Thank you. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful comment and really captures something. Yeah, Perry, did you want to say any more? Or I don't know if she's still there. I see Juan. Yeah, you have your hand up. So yeah, please.
I was just wondering about, so how do you balance, for all three of you, how do you balance the like purpose and intention versus allowing the piece to take you wherever? Like, where do you, how do you balance those? So it's like, am I just gonna let this piece take me wherever, or do I have a purpose? Am I trying to get somewhere? Or like, I kind of want to hear about I don't really have anything, but just kind of want to hear the relationship that you have between like purpose and the life of the piece that you're writing.
I can start. Um, I I try to avoid, well, I mean, I think many of us approach writing poems as exploring something or asking a question in our heads, and the poem is an exploration of that idea. And so there isn't necessarily, you know, there often isn't something that I set out to say. It's more just, let's see what this is about. And it'll come out in the poem. But I just listened to the poets.org. There's a poets.org conversation between with Carl, the very famous Carl Phillips and Paul Tran. And the host asked this kind of the same question, like, how do you balance, how do you let yourself be open to what the poem wants to do, but also sometimes you have something that you're trying to say, you know? And what they kind of came back with was that through the poem, you can say what you need to say if that's what you have to do, but it becomes what you have to say about it, you know, like what I can say about this thing that you can't say, or what you can say that I can't say. And I thought that was a good answer.
Mm.
I
Oh,
like that
that's
answer. I would agree with that. I feel like I think I always maybe start out with an idea or some kind of intention, and most of the time that's not where it ends up. Because as Abby says, I'm exploring, I'm asking myself, what does this really mean?
mhm.
And oftentimes I don't know until I start writing. And a lot of times language guides me. I really like to pay attention to language and making sure that they all play off of each other. And sometimes that brings about a whole different sense of the poem.
Mm.
And I'll go with it because it actually is true.
Yeah. So I can add to that a little bit. It brought up a thought for me, and I actually just remembered this. Somebody I had on this in one of these readings, and I have to think his name. I hope his name will come back to me before I finish answering. But he says that he sometimes will try to insert, like he'll find something that's something interesting or something totally maybe different from what he was writing about. And then he sits down and tries to figure out a way to write what he wants to write about and insert this other thing that is also very interesting. And I actually, since hearing about that, and I didn't realize it, but I started doing that a little bit. And I find that to be also a really interesting way to try to write. So I'm thinking, starting out, like, what do I want to say? And then I have this other thing that I heard, maybe it was a quote or something I saw in a museum or something in a book I'm reading or on the radio, or and then I'm trying to weave that into the poem, and that really takes me someplace I never would have expected. And that, I think that's really a wonderful thing to do if you can make it work. It has to somehow tie together, and that's not always that easy. So that's where the revision really, get to work on that in the revision. Yeah.
Yep.
So you were talking about revision, Mistee, and that you said that's really, really important part of it. You can't not revise. Yeah.
I love revision. It's my favorite part. I mean, I love being inspired and for something to get me going, but I really love revision. It gives me a chance to play with language and form and think deeper. And I'm really questioning about, whatever inspired the beginning of the poem. It's a way to dig in. I'm not a very it's a way for me to express things that I can't express otherwise. So revision allows me to say things that I couldn't say out loud, to be vulnerable.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really very inspiring. Oh, look, here's a question. Oh, wait, was someone else going to say something?
Well, I wanted to add
Oh,
something.
Perry, yeah.
I didn't quite talk about the extraordinary, the ordinary to the extraordinary.
That's okay.
But I love the way that you talk to your reader in your poems. And it's like you're riding your pen. You're writing the poem, you're writing the pen and letting it take you wherever it wants to go. And that's hooked up with memory, I think, because, you know, you'll have these images and you'll start talking about these images and then these memories will come. And then you are in the heart of what moves you. And then it moves us, the hearer, you know, and I just thought that was beautiful. I mean, I think that's how we get to the extraordinary, because this word becomes a metaphor for what it is to be human, and not only your life but ours. So I thought that was wonderful.
Oh, beautifully said.
And I'm reminded Phyllis about that, how you write poems to each other in response to each other's poems. Phyllis and I did that with each other many years ago.
Yes, we did.
Phyllis, you know?
Yes, we did. Well, maybe we're going to do it again sometime, you know.
Right,
It's been on my mind.
right.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Well, we wrote those two poems about angels, remember?
Right.
Mhm.
And we were not planning on writing letter poems back and forth to each other. You know, I haven't read the poem now in years, but I was thinking of it just now. I remember the first line: "Angels are mistakes corrected."
Mhm.
And then I wrote a poem all about that, or wherever it took me, and then you responded, and we were off and running.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful thing to do with a fellow poet that you have camaraderie with, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's a question from Jamie Stoneham. When writing your beautiful poetry, do you think of a title first, or is a title found after writing the poem, or both? Or another way of asking that, how do you get to your titles?
I hate titles. It's my least favorite part. Um, yeah, it comes last. Um, and I don't know, I find them challenging and not in a fun way. It's hard to find the right one
Mm.
often.
Surprising, because you do so beautifully with it.
Thanks.
Well, I don't like revision so much, so there you go. I think we all have our favorite parts of the process. Yeah. I mean, but it's not totally necessary to do all of them. Yeah. Other comments about the title?
I would say it comes at any point. Sometimes it's the last, which is most often the case. I recently embraced long titles, which are kind of fun because you can give a little bit more explanation, especially if a poem is not explicitly saying, but maybe with the title will answer that question. Sometimes it's in the middle of the poem.
I always thought it would be fun to write a chapbook of nothing but titles.
Mhm.
Just I did one time. I wrote a title that was like 14 lines long, and which gave me the idea, and I've never done anything with it after that. But then the poem was blank, and except is that I'm finished. That's all I have to say. You figure it out. Titles are fun. I think that having a working title, you know, and then just see where it goes, because you don't know till you get to the end of the poem, and then maybe it's about something else.
Mm. Yeah. And then knowing if you want to make a title that's really specific to the poem or description, or if you want a title that is maybe whimsical, it doesn't really speak exactly to what's in the poem, but it kind of connects or ties together, weaves together in some way. Yeah.
I was in a workshop with William Stafford in Santa Barbara, 1993, just a few months before he died. And he was talking about titles. And he said, if you want your work to be published, 50% of that is the title.
Oh.
He said, some people talk, you know, say it's the first line. He said, no, it's the title. Titles are very important. Just thought I don't, you know, who knows if he was right or not. That was his opinion, but I thought it was an interesting comment.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing to go back if for editing purposes. 50% is huge, says Renee. Yeah. And also Jamie says, I agree. I really like your titles. They seem, oh, sorry. Oops. It seems like they pull out something that you really want to emphasize. Yeah. And I did want to also say, Angela wrote, she wrote in the chat, thank you so much for the wonderful selection, very moving and beautifully crafted. I totally agree. Very happy to be here for this reading. We're happy to have you, Angela. And Kathy Les says, Misty and Abby, so great to spend this time with you both and your beautiful poems. Oh, you're going to go? Okay, we'll see you soon. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah, so yeah, go ahead, Abby.
Well, I was just going to ask Misty and your opinion too, Phyllis, about one of the things we talking about was incorporating joy into dark or sorrowful poems. And I'm interested in if you have any thoughts about that.
My instinct is my first instinct is to say why. Because if you need to write what you need to write, then you write what you need to write. And I think that will come when it needs to come. But I also was thinking about, Amanda shared a long time ago, and then she recently reshared that the notes from a workshop or something she took with Natalie Diaz about lexicons. And I was thinking that you could use, you know, a word that represents joy or lightness or whatever to you, and creating a lexicon and, you know, incorporating that into your poems. And then I was also thinking about, you know, engaging in wordplay and riffing off of things could be a way. I mean, it's how can you not be lighthearted if you're playing with words?
Yeah.
I mean, even thinking about the poem Cosmos that you read, that has a lot of wordplay in there. And it's taking, I mean, there's a background of darkness in that poem, and purple is a dark color, but somehow the repetition of that and the short stanzas, it's a very light poem. And I think part of that is because that you're using wordplay there.
Yeah.
So yeah, as a question to the larger group, before we start to finish up, I just wonder, is that if you hear a poem that's dark, or that has, you know, some real suffering in it, does that, how does that work for you? I mean, do you want there to be more joy in that poem too, or do you want, I mean, this is a topic we talked about this last time too. So, and I don't know if anyone has any more thoughts about it. I mean, if anybody wants to say, so Chris in the chat says it would, the first level of joy comes from a poem completed. Yeah. And hearing a really beautifully crafted poem, or a poem that comes directly from the heart is yeah, I think that brings a certain amount of joy, even if it's very sad. I mean, I love poems that make me cry for sure, or really touch me. When I hear the word oncologist in a poem, I'm just immediately like so deeply moved by that. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking of like, I don't mind going along for the ride either way, you know, as long as the poem is real and true. I think that's the biggest thing for me. Like if it's real, I'm gonna feel something. And if it's like, because if it's real, you're really crafting, you're really working with it because it means something. And when it's not, then I'm gonna feel that too. So I think that if it in either way, I want to go to hell or to heaven. I don't mind going either way, you know, as deep as you can go, or it's the high as you can go, whatever. And I think that that thing about bringing joy into the darkness, it's maybe a talk of transformation, you know, like there are poems that start really dark and then they have a resolution towards the opposite, or continue to be dark, you know, so they're a bit of whatever, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, Misty, I really enjoyed the way, and I really admired the way that you introduced um, the poems, particularly about your father, and just how you talked about it. I thought you did a beautiful job with that. So I wanted to say that those poems, are very touching and really, really painful, difficult, and I just think you and the way you read them too. So that matters a lot, I think. Also,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So let's see where we are. Um, anything else before I have a poem to close us with. And anybody else wanna say anything? Okay. All right, we're good then. Okay, well, so I really want to thank Misty and Abby so much, um, and and so appreciate your beautiful, beautiful poetry and having you in my life. And I want to thank everybody who's here and this wonderful conversation that we've had. And I thought to close, I would read the poem that came from the epigraph of my poem, The Human Tragedy, that I read at the beginning. And I thought I would do that because it kind of explains a little more about the gardens. So that so Jack Gilbert is writing here about gardens that have just been made too neat and too clean. And in my poem, I was writing about the ones that he references at the end that come from India. So you'll hear that at the end about the dandelions, that everything got weeded out except the dandelions. So the poem is called The Difficult Beauty, and it's in his collected works. The Difficult Beauty. The air full of pictures, no matter where you reach in. Vast caverns in the ground, bright with electricity, and covered everywhere with language. Because you live on the fourth floor, you can on Sundays look down into the synagogue across the street where people sing secretly together in Spanish. You are up there trying to get the galleys marked, which are so late because of love that Yale threatens not to publish the book at all. Noise so loud, you finally look outside and see everybody gathered on 4th Street near Avenue C to eat ice cream and watch the guys carrying a naked woman down the fire escape clumsily, who had been promising all morning to jump. But best of all are the gardens, hidden places where they have burned down the buildings and kept the soil poor so the plants won't grow with vulgar abundance. Like the Japanese gardens made only of rocks and sand, so their beauty would not be obscured by appearances. Like the Maharaja, who set aside the best courtyards in his palace for the dandelions he imported from England to be kept alive by the finest gardeners in the world who knew how to work against nature. And bravo to Jack Gilbert. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been just a wonderful reading, and I'll read what Juan says. My heart is singing the cosmic love songs. Thank you, Juan. Thanks, everybody.